What's going on, everybody? It's RoyJ coming at you with a brand new video, and as you probably know, we recently got the September 2023 Forbidden and Limited list, and I think the general reaction is that it's kinda useless. Though with Cash basically completely out of the way now instead of slowly fading out in the light of Unchained, I think we can officially say we're in a new format, and I think it's actually a pretty interesting one. Unchained isn't a very unfair deck, and a lot of the other decks aren't necessarily very unfair either, except for a few problem cards that really should have been addressed on the list instead of Dragon Link hits. But with a new format comes a new list of hand traps in order to tinker around with, and find the ones which best suit every deck. With this in mind, the main decks that I want to focus on in this video are I think it's Unchained, Purely, Fluandereeze is actually seeing a huge spike in play now because it directly counters Unchained, and I guess you could say Branded and maybe Monadium or Labyrinth or something like that, but the main ones to discuss are generally Unchained, Fluandereeze, and Purely, sorry. Also keep in mind this list is being made before Age of Overlord comes out. I definitely want to have a new tier list for before Age of Overlord once October actually hits because I'm making this a bit earlier in September, but this is mostly focusing on the here and now. But with all that being said, let's go ahead and get right into my hand trap tier list for the October 2023 format. Starting off, we have the poster child Ash Blossom, and I think Ash is a fairly strong hand trap right now. When you think about a lot of the decks right now, you think of the Flu and Purely and Unchained and stuff like that. Against Unchained, you can hit Tour Guide, or you can hit the special summons from deck off of the trap cards, especially. Against Purely, you can hit literally all of the spells, especially My Friend, and it's especially good against Fluandereeze because unlike something like Imperm, they can't use Advent of Adventure to dodge Ash on Rabina or Eaglin. It's also solid against some of the lower decks as well, between Branded and Lab both kind of getting one-shot by it most of the time, and then all of the other lesser tier decks, especially Dragon Link now because both Magnuma and Chaos Space making them take consistency hits. Basically, I think Ash is going to be a mainstay in decks now again, and especially when November hits, we're going to see that quarter century secret rare finally giving her a high rarity. Next on our list we have Bell, and I actually don't think Bell is too crazy right now, because against Unchained you're really only hitting the blue dog and that's about it, maybe the Abominable Unchained Soul in the graveyard. Against Flu, you're hitting basically nothing. Against Purely, I mean, I think you can hit the Lily here, and that's mainly about it. But at that point, you'd rather play a different card like DD Crow, because it just has a lot more impact overall. And so, Bell just kind of feels I guess more of a local meta call than anything. I don't know, maybe you got that one Tri-Brigade player playing Revolt still. But other than that, I don't really think Bell is doing anything that you could just not find from a different card. Speaking of the Bystials, though, I'm going to put the Bystials in strong AF, because even with Magnuma down to 1, Druisworm is basically the more important Bystial right now regardless, because it's a sending removal as opposed to destruction, so it outs any of the Unchains rather efficiently. Not to mention that if you use it against Yama, not only are they losing the Yama, they're having to stare down this 2500 body that they can't remove or else it's going to send their card to the graveyard, and that it can just destroy their stuff by battle regardless. So it's basically they either have to choose between, getting their Unicorn set that they used it to go into, or just allowing the Unchained Soul of Rage to get the floating effect by battle. Not to mention, Baldrake is also a really solid card right now as well. Being able to banish something summoned from the extra deck instead of destroying is also really, really good. I think the Bystials, while they don't have too many targets all around in the meta, they have a bunch against some lower tier decks, as well as against Unchained. They at least have the Yama and the Sarama as well. But I mean, hell, you can use it against Branded, you can use it decently against Purely in case they're trying to get the resources back. They're really good in the grind game against Purely. And I think if your side deck has the room for them, Bystials are not a bad call at all. Next on our list is Chaos Hunter, and Chaos Hunter doesn't really do anything. The only deck that's really banishing right now is Flu, and it's not gonna work against Flu because your opponent doesn't special summon. Next on our list is Contact C, and much like the last few lists, Contact C doesn't really do anything because it only works against Purely and Branded. Branded doesn't really care too much because they can go into it if they are playing the Sprint, or they can just use some other way to get rid of it. And yeah, Purely can end up having a bit of a hard time against it, but it's still not the end of the world for them. They can just link it off. Next up is DD Crow, and DD Crow is actually a really, really solid hand trap right now, because DD Crow works against just about every deck we've talked about except for Flu. So when it comes to Unchained, this is basically just a better Bestial overall other than the specific Druid Swarm play, because it can hit anything in Grave, not just lights and darks. You can also hit whatever Sarama targets as well, so they don't get the effect there. Against Purely, you can hit whatever Lily is attempting to target, or you can just hit a bunch of things in general in Graveyard that are being targeted by that matchup. And then against something like Lab, you know, you can hit the furniture, things like Coup Clock as well. Against Branded, you can hit Albaz out of Grave if they go for Albion, or any other certain play like that. Also technically works against the Gimmick Puppet in case they don't have Mercurier access. Basically, DD Crow is like a jack of all trades against a lot of stuff this format, and so I would genuinely recommend playing DD Crow in your side if you have the room for it. Next on the list is Dimension Shifter, and feel free to witch hunt me in the comments, but I'm actually going to put Shifter in the top of Situational, mainly because the only deck playing it right now is Flu, because Cash is basically no more, and Flu isn't like Cash in the sense that it can Shifter you, you're unable to play, and then they just kill you immediately on the next turn. Flu more so uses this opportunity to set up its resource loop and its combo, which, while annoying, isn't completely unbreakable or super difficult to out now because Barrier Statue isn't a thing anymore. Shifter is still a very powerful card, and I mean, hell, the macro effect on Arise Heart's the thing that ended up getting it banned in the first place, and so a lot of decks, while they can't play through a macro, they're not gonna have the hardest time against Shifter with Flu, because Flu isn't an all-powerful deck like Cash was. Next up, we have Droll, and I'm actually gonna put Droll in the strong AF category. So Droll, if Flu doesn't open Shifter, kind of just, it completely shits on it. Against Purely, if they don't activate most of their effects in the draw phase, like if they have to start with the My Friend, then this basically shits on it as well. Against Unchained, it doesn't really do anything unless they start with Prosperity, to be fair. And then against some other decks like Branded and Lab, they really couldn't care less most of the time. It does hit Monadium pretty hard though, and then things like Dragon Link. I think Droll is like a solid card overall, but it's mostly like a side deck card now as opposed to a main deck card in my opinion, because with so much of the player base on Unchained right now, it's going to end up not really being amazing as opposed to like last format, for example, where we had a lot of people playing things like Monadium or whatever, trying to go for the Calamity Lock, etc. Next up, we have Gamma, and unfortunately, while Gamma's play was always dwindling after its limit regardless, Chaos Space was definitely keeping it up in Dragon Link, because you could at least search the Gamma. But now with Chaos Space at 1, it's basically not going to see play in anything except for pure Psyframes, which you're not going to really see outside of specifically EDO Pro casual lobbies. Rest in peace, friend. Rest in peace. Next up, we have Ghost Sister, and as always, it's going to go in the strong AF category, so long as the time rules are a thing. Definitely a card that you have to have the room in your side deck for, and you have to play the call, in that if you think your deck is going to draw out until time, then yeah, go ahead and play it. But technically, because it can just outright win you the rulings of time, I'm going to keep it in the strong AF category. Next up is No Material, and much as I love No Material, still a very situational card. Doesn't even work against Flu, for example, because they don't special summon, which is like one of the main things that made me like this card in the first place when I was first starting to preach about it, because I was like, oh yeah, you can No Material Flu, prevent them from tributing stuff. Yeah, you can't do that, by the way. While its effect isn't the worst in the world, it could definitely just could be better. Next up on our list is Orange Light, and while Orange Light is now at 3, it's still going into the situational category, because as powerful as a hand trap as it is, it's still only played in like 2 or 3 decks, and I can think it's like Drytron, Fluffle, and Madolche, and while 2 of those decks are significantly, actually, technically all of these decks are significantly better now that Arise Heart's gone, it's still really only in those decks. Next up on our list is Imperm, and Imperm is going to be the 3rd card in our high impact category. It's so funny that all these high impact cards, not even like Floodgate effects or mass blowouts, it's literally just the 1-drops. But Imperm is a really powerful card because not only can you stop things like Tour Guide, hitting the Purely on summon, or just things in general like that, also works against Flu in case they don't have Advent or Book. This can literally just win you games against Unchained, because they'll typically end on like Escape and Rage if they're not ending on the Griffin stuff, which you can hit the Griffin stuff with it too. But like literally all you have to do is just Imperm the Unchained Soul of Rage, and you essentially force out the Escape as fast as possible so they can summon back the Unchained Soul of Rage with their Yama so they can try to get the effect live again. But that does give you enough wiggle room to actually start getting your plays going, which is really good for most decks, because a lot of stuff, if they get hit on the very first card summoned, can just end up completely dying. Plus, as always, Imperm is just such a good card to pair with another hand trap such as Ash or DD Crow in this example, because DD Crow hitting Yama means the Rage is completely dead, and then Ash can also make your opponent have to use all of their resources to play through the combo, or they might just have to stop their combo entirely if you hit them with Ash Imperm. Imperm. Next up is Lancia. Lancia's going in the don't recommend category, similarly to Chaos Hunter. At least you can use this one against Flu and it does something, but even in that regard, it doesn't really do much because they're still gonna play. Like, they just lose access to the ones that they, get banished usually because they're getting sent to the graveyard, but that's really about it, so it's not really worth it. So next on our list is Ghost Mourner, and Ghost Mourner is a bit interesting to me because against Unchained, you can hit like the Yama, for example, and that's like the main thing I can think about. Against Purely, you can hit just about anything at least, but like against Flu, it's completely dead because your opponent doesn't special summon at all. So I'm not quite sure where I want to place Ghost Mourner because I think it's still a strong card because it is basically just a Veiler that also happens to do burn. But like, I don't know, I think I want to put it in situational. I think Ghost Mourner is a fine card, but like in this format in particular, you're not really hitting too many things that are impactful enough for me to warrant putting Ghost Mourner over like Veiler or Imperm in my deck. So I think I'm just going to leave her in situational for now. Next up is Nibiru, and I think Nib is actually incredibly powerful right now. Against Unchained, if they don't have the specific combo that plays through Nib, I think it's like the Tour Guide combo plus an Extender. It might just be the Tour Guide combo, period. But if they have to do a different combo, you can just completely ruin their day with a Nib. And then you can also hit Branded pretty decently hard. You can hit Purely pretty hard. I mean, hell, if the Flu player overextends enough and opens good enough, you can even Nib them. So you can basically hit just about any deck right now with Nib, and a lot of them can't or won't prepare for it. Like I said, I think Unchained is the only one that can generally play through it. But even then, if you open Nib in combination with another hand trap like Imperm or Ash or something like that, it's just really, really good, and your opponent kind of just can't do very much as you end up popping off on your turn. Next on the list is Ogre, and I think Ogre is fine. I think she's better than Belle because you can hit things like Magnificent Map and stuff like that. You can hit the Tour Guide so that they don't have the extra body on board. Like, you can hit a few different things with Ogre, but until like Age of Overlord, when Horus comes out and we have to hit the continuous spell, I don't really think that Ogre is too fantastic. Overall, if you're playing a deck that plays a bunch of hand traps like Math Mech or something, for example, or Marincess, Ogre is definitely an option, but other than that, I don't really think she's like a side deck worthy just yet. Next up is Skullmeister, and I think Skullmeister is actually not bad at all. Stopping graveyard effects is huge against Unchained because literally everything in their graveyard floats, but in regards to the top decks, it's one of the only decks that you're actually hitting. You can hit things like Lab and Branded and stuff, of course, but like when it comes to the top three, it's like it's really only hitting Unchained, and while it does hit it pretty hard, you kind of have to open another hand trap most of the time as well. I'll just put it above Belle, below Ogre, because it's better than Belle in my opinion right now, but overall, it's just okay. Next on our list is Veiler. I think Veiler is a pretty solid card overall. Similar to Imperm, other than the fact that you can't use it as a board breaker, but it does stop Tour Guide. It stops Flu players if they don't have Advent or Book. Stops Purely as well. And it's not a once per turn, so you can open multiple and usually be pretty comfortable unless your opponent shifters you. Next up is Winter Cherries. Much as I love Winter Cherries, unfortunately, she's also not that great. She's better than Chaos Hunter, at least, in my opinion. But most decks don't really have the room to afford playing Winter Cherries, much less actually want to play Winter Cherries even if they could. And finally, we have Fantastic Dragon Phantasme, which I don't remember if it was in the last list because I was supposed to remove it for the most recent hand trap tier list that I just never got around to doing. But Phantasme is actually doing a lot better this format compared to last format. I think it's pretty decent right now, mainly because the best deck is a Link deck, and so you can actually get some use out of it, but it's really only against Unchained, so I think I might actually put it at the top of situational, because against Unchained, this is really, really good. I mean, you can get a bunch of draws cycle through your hand, and the targeting protection against Unchained Soul of Rage and Escape of the Unchained, really, really good. But that's mostly it, because against Flu, they're not Link summoning. Against Purely, they're mostly just Xyz summoning. Branded's Fusion summoning. Lab can just not summon from the extra deck at all. Monodium's mostly Synchro summoning. Like, Phantasme is mostly just a one-trick pony against Unchained, and that's about it. Well, everybody, that's going to do it for my hand trap tier list for October 2023 pre-Age of Overlord. Again, I don't really think too much is going to change post-Age of Overlord. I know Labyrinth gets a bit stronger, and That's the main one I can think about other than Horus becoming a thing, but we'll really have to see when we actually get there, because Horus and Diabellstar might actually shake up the format a decent amount. I think this format is fun, even though it is a little bit weird, because a lot of stuff kind of like, you have to prepare for one deck, but at the same time, like, you can't really prepare for another deck because there's just so many different decks that can be played right now, and a lot of the decks aren't super oppressive. So I don't know, finding the right balance of hand traps and board breakers is just a bit awkward. Speaking of board breakers though, be sure to tune in a week from now, I believe. I'm going to attempt to have a board breaker tier list, as always, to match up with the hand trap tier list. But until then, that's going to do it for the video. If you liked it, please sure to leave a like, as I'll split this video and the channel into two recommended. And if this content and you like it, like the rest of my tier list, then perhaps consider subscribing, because we're going to 5,000 subscribers by the end of 2023, which we're very close to, by the way. Not to mention, it supports the channel more than anything else, and it's absolutely free. If you also want to support me directly while getting some awesome TCG merchandise in the process, check out Tapio cards in the link down below. Use code Aurora5 for 5% off your purchase at checkout, and support me financially. Once again, thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. This is Aurora, signing off.